Bob Crane's life seemed perfect on the surface, but behind closed doors, a deadly secret simmered. His murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mystery that would haunt Hollywood forever. 47 years later, the question still lingers: was his death an accident, or was it something far more calculated? Bob Crane was not just a television star, he was an icon, a cultural figure whose image transcended the boundaries of his acting career. As Colonel Hogan in Hogan's Heroes, he embodied the perfect blend of charm, wit, and authority that made him a household name in the 1960s. To millions of Americans, he wasn't just a character on a screen, he was a hero, someone they trusted, admired, and, most importantly, felt they knew. The series, which aired from 1965 to 1971, depicted the World War II antics of a group of Allied prisoners in a German POW camp, with Crane playing the quick-witted and resourceful leader who outsmarted his captors at every turn. His performance resonated with viewers, offering a mix of light-hearted humor and subtle rebellion, a theme that would echo in the contradictions of his own life. But while the world saw him as the wholesome, dependable star on screen, Bob Crane's real life was far more complex, a blend of contradictions, secrets, and a longing for something that went beyond the laughter and applause. Born in 1928 in Waterbury, Connecticut, Bob Crane's path to stardom was not an easy one. His early years were steeped in the realities of a middle-class family life. Crane's natural talent for radio and voice work led him to become a well-known radio personality in the 1950s. His deep voice and likable persona made him a popular figure on air, and by the time Hogan's Heroes debuted, he had already cemented his presence in the entertainment world. Crane's career in television, however, would elevate him to a level of fame he had never experienced in radio. Hogan's Heroes provided the perfect platform for his comedic talents. As Colonel Hogan, Crane was the quintessential American hero, a man who outsmarted his captors with ease and charisma. The show's success, running for 6 seasons, solidified Crane's position as one of the most recognizable TV stars of the era. The role allowed him to be a light-hearted symbol of American ingenuity and bravery, and it earned him a lasting place in the hearts of millions. His portrayal of Hogan wasn't just a reflection of the character's intelligence and courage, it also embodied the spirit of resilience and humor in the face of adversity, a sentiment that struck a chord with the American public during a time of growing social upheaval and political unrest. Off-screen, Crane was often seen as the quintessential family man. He had been married twice and had children from both marriages, and he frequently spoke of his love for his family. His first marriage, to Anne, his high school sweetheart, ended in divorce, but it was clear that his second marriage, to Hogan's Heroes co-star, Sigrid Valdis, was a deeply significant chapter in his life. Crane and Valdis, who played the character of Hilda, were not just professional partners but personal ones as well. They shared a bond that seemed to speak to the public's desire to see a perfect, wholesome TV couple. But behind the glossy exterior, Crane's family life was far from idyllic. His marriage to Valdis, while outwardly stable, was plagued with tension. The pressures of fame, compounded by Crane's increasing dissatisfaction with the public's perception of him, created friction at home. Valdis, who later revealed some of the deeper struggles in their relationship, wasn't the only person who saw the cracks in Crane's perfect image. Friends and colleagues also noticed that his personal life was becoming increasingly erratic. Crane's relationships were not just impacted by his career but also by his personal desires that were at odds with the image he was trying to uphold. His passion for filming his sexual encounters, something that was kept far from the public eye, became a driving force in his life. This secret obsession, shared with his close friend and business partner, John Henry Carpenter, would soon prove to be a significant part of the story that would unfold. Despite his familial devotion, Crane's secret life hinted at a man grappling with his own desires, unable to reconcile his public image with his private actions. Bob Crane's public persona was carefully crafted. He was the wholesome American hero, a man who seemed to have it all: the career, the fame, the family. His role as Colonel Hogan was not just a job, it was a calling. The show's success made him a fixture of American television, and his likable, charming demeanor made him a beloved figure. Off-camera, he was frequently described as approachable, warm, and witty, someone who could easily make a room feel lighter with just a few words. But this public persona was a double-edged sword. While it provided Crane with fame and adoration, it also created an overwhelming sense of pressure. The more successful he became, the more people expected him to be the perfect husband, father, and star. Crane's desire for approval and validation from the public became an ever-present weight on his shoulders. His need to maintain the perfect image, despite the underlying turmoil in his personal life, led to a growing internal conflict. In interviews, Crane often spoke of how he valued his role as a father and husband, but those close to him began to see the distance between his words and his actions. His personal relationships, especially his marriage to Valdis, began to deteriorate, a reflection of the emotional struggles Crane faced behind the scenes. His obsession with recording his private life, a desire to document his sexual encounters, started to take over, pushing him further into a world of secrecy. His personal needs were in direct conflict with his public persona, and this clash created a rift that would only widen in the years to come. Crane's fascination with filming his sexual experiences was not just a quirky side hobby, it became a significant part of his identity. What began as a private pursuit slowly transformed into an obsession. He wasn't just documenting his personal encounters, he was creating a visual record of his desires, capturing moments that were meant to be kept in the shadows. This secret life stood in stark contrast to the image of the all-American hero that he projected on television. His relationship with Carpenter, built around this shared obsession, became increasingly destructive. What Crane had once considered a harmless hobby quickly began to dominate his life. This obsession also had a significant impact on Crane's friendships. His relationship with Carpenter, in particular, became strained as the two men's connection deepened. While Crane seemed to rely on Carpenter for support in his private endeavors, the friendship was marked by jealousy, competition, and a sense of emotional manipulation. Carpenter, who had his own dark inclinations, seemed to grow more possessive over time. This dynamic would later become a critical part of the investigation into Crane's death. Bob Crane's life was marked by contradictions. On the surface, he was everything the public adored, charming, funny, and a hero on screen. But beneath that persona was a man struggling with his own identity, his relationships, and the pressure of fame. His obsession with recording his personal life and the secrets he kept from the world were just the beginning of a deeper, more complicated story. Though Crane's fame made him a symbol of success, it also boxed him into a life he couldn't escape. The facade he worked so hard to build was starting to crumble under the weight of his own desires. Behind closed doors, Crane's life was far from the picture-perfect narrative that the world saw. And as his personal and professional worlds collided, the stage was set for a tragedy that would haunt Hollywood for decades to come. Bob Crane's legacy, however, remains tied to his iconic role in Hogan's Heroes. To millions, he will forever be remembered as Colonel Hogan, the clever, resourceful leader who could outsmart his enemies with humor and ingenuity. But to those who knew him best, Crane was a man of complexity and contradiction, whose personal struggles and secrets were never fully understood. His death, still a mystery after 47 years, only deepens the enigma surrounding the man who was both a hero and a tragic figure, a star whose real life was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Where are you watching from? Drop your locations in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop your comment with "I am still here." Let's see who is still watching. John Henry Carpenter entered Bob Crane's life like many friends do, through shared interests. Carpenter, a video equipment salesman, was the kind of person who blended into the background, at least at first. Yet, he would become an undeniably pivotal figure in Crane's life. Their relationship, initially rooted in mutual interests, grew into something darker, more obsessive, and ultimately destructive. To those on the outside, Carpenter was a friend, a companion who simply helped his star friend capture the intimate moments that Crane wanted to document. But the truth about their friendship would reveal something far more unsettling. Was Carpenter truly just a friend, or was there something far more insidious at play? John Henry Carpenter was not a household name like Bob Crane, but their relationship was significant enough to become the focus of both public curiosity and private suspicion after Crane's death. The two men's connection was rooted in a shared passion, filming their sexual encounters. What started as a casual hobby, a mutual interest in documenting private moments, soon became an obsession. Carpenter, who supplied Crane with the necessary video equipment, entered the scene as a silent accomplice. At first glance, their bond appeared innocent, two men enjoying a private hobby. But as their friendship deepened, so did the intensity of their shared obsession. Carpenter was not just a bystander in Crane's world, he was deeply involved in the darker corners of Crane's private life. Together, they documented intimate encounters, but their activities were not limited to just filming for personal amusement. For Carpenter, the act of capturing these moments was not just about voyeurism, it was about control. He was drawn to the idea of preserving these encounters, capturing them on film as if to cement his presence in Crane's world. The more time they spent together, the more it became clear that Carpenter's feelings toward Crane were not entirely platonic. What had started as a simple friendship slowly shifted into something far more consuming for Carpenter, and his obsession would soon become all-consuming. As the years passed, the lines between friendship and obsession blurred. Carpenter's involvement in Crane's life wasn't limited to his role as a friend. He became a fixture in Crane's world, one who was not just recording moments but slowly inserting himself into every aspect of Crane's life. This was not a passive friendship. Carpenter had grown possessive of his access to Crane, not only as a friend but as someone who now felt entitled to a more significant role in Crane's personal world. His growing fixation on Crane was a subtle undercurrent that many didn't recognize at first. The psychological shift in Carpenter's behavior was apparent to those who knew him. He was no longer just an enabler of Crane's private hobby, he had become emotionally attached to the process. His bond with Crane had grown beyond a shared interest to something more desperate. Carpenter, whose presence was once that of a trusted friend, began to display signs of possessiveness. As Crane's relationships with others began to fray, most notably with his wife, Sigrid Valdis, Carpenter's grip on Crane tightened. Crane had become weary of the controlling nature that was emerging in their friendship, but Carpenter, seemingly unable to accept the idea of a life without Crane at its center, refused to let go. For those on the outside, their friendship was one of mutual respect. Carpenter was often described as someone who could get along with anyone, and his quiet, unassuming nature did little to draw suspicion. But as Crane began to pull away, Carpenter's true feelings began to surface. It became clear that their bond was not based on a simple camaraderie but something more complex, and at times, toxic. Crane's emotional and physical distance only seemed to fuel Carpenter's obsession, as if the more Crane tried to sever their connection, the harder Carpenter clung to it. This emotional manipulation was subtle but real. Carpenter was no longer the humble friend who simply aided in Crane's passion for filming, he was someone trying to control the narrative of their relationship, to ensure that he remained an integral part of Crane's life. The tension between the two men mounted as Crane's personal life continued to unravel. He had been struggling in his marriage to Valdis, and his private passions were pushing him into more secretive and isolated corners. Carpenter, whose role in Crane's life had once been about sharing a hobby, now seemed more interested in controlling the man. He was increasingly present, not just as a friend but as a figure who was embedded in the fabric of Crane's personal affairs. When Crane attempted to distance himself, Carpenter's refusal to let go became a dangerous power play. The longer Crane resisted, the more Carpenter's obsession seemed to escalate. What had begun as a casual friendship was now suffused with an uncomfortable intensity. On the evening of June 29, 1978, Bob Crane's life was abruptly and violently cut short. His apartment, once a safe haven where he found peace away from the public eye, transformed into a chilling crime scene that no one could have anticipated. What had once been a place of comfort now stood as a stark reminder of how quickly and brutally life can be upended. The scene was not one of chaos, but of unnerving calmness, an eerie stillness that would puzzle investigators and haunt everyone involved in the case for years to come. It had been a seemingly ordinary day for Crane. There was no sense of impending danger, no signs of stress or fear. Crane had spoken to friends earlier, made casual plans for the evening, and appeared in good spirits. As the sun set and night fell over Scottsdale, Arizona, the 49-year-old actor had retired to his apartment to unwind. Perhaps he was reflecting on his tumultuous career, or the strain in his personal life. Regardless, nothing appeared out of the ordinary, until the door to his apartment swung open to reveal a scene of unimaginable horror. It wasn't until a friend, unable to reach Crane by phone, arrived at the apartment that the gravity of the situation began to unfold. What they discovered inside would send shockwaves through the investigation. Crane's lifeless body, battered and bruised, was found lying face down on the bedroom floor. But it wasn't the brutality of the crime that first struck those who discovered him, it was the absence of the expected chaos. The room was strangely serene, almost too still. There was no sign of forced entry, no scuffle, no desperate attempt to escape. The simplicity of the scene, in contrast to the violent nature of the crime, was unsettling. When the police arrived shortly thereafter, they were met with a scene that would leave them grappling for answers. Bob Crane's body lay motionless on the floor, a pool of blood surrounding him. But the crime didn't look like one born of blind rage. The lack of struggle, the absence of a fight for survival, was striking. There were no signs of a forced entry into the apartment, no broken locks, no damaged windows. Nothing to suggest that the killer had been an intruder. The brutality of the attack was evident, severe blunt force trauma to the head, but no other wounds that would indicate a violent altercation. Crane's body had been left in a position that suggested little or no resistance. He was, in many ways, still the picture of tranquility, if not for the horrifying violence that had stolen his life. This paradox, the extreme violence in a setting so eerily calm, was the first of many contradictions that would define this case. How could a man with so much to live for, a man who had once made millions laugh, come to meet such a cold, calculated end? What struck investigators most about the scene was its stillness. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed. The furnishings were undisturbed, the lights were on, and everything was neatly in place. It was a contrast that would come to define the crime. The violence, though severe, was almost clinical in its execution. And yet, there was no sign of a fight, no desperate movement to escape. Crane, it seemed, had known his killer, or at least, had allowed them in without suspicion. This raised immediate red flags. The lack of forced entry suggested the involvement of someone who had access to Crane's private space. Someone who was trusted. The absence of a struggle indicated that the murder might have been a calculated act, not one born of sudden anger or impulsivity. The scene was unsettling because it seemed to defy the conventional expectations of a murder investigation. This was no chaotic confrontation, no random attack, it was deliberate, planned, and intimate in nature. The first significant clue that would point investigators in a direction came from the discovery of blood in an unexpected place, a rental car. The car, which belonged to John Henry Carpenter, a close friend of Crane, was found to have bloodstains matching Crane's blood type. But the discovery only complicated matters. The police, in their rush to process evidence, failed to preserve this critical lead. What was initially thought to be a definitive piece of evidence, blood belonging to the victim, would become a point of contention, muddling the investigation with confusion and errors. The connection to Carpenter was clear, but the importance of this evidence was diminished by improper handling. At the time, this was the most significant lead. It seemed to link Carpenter directly to the crime. His proximity to Crane, both physically and emotionally, made him a person of interest almost immediately. Yet, the evidence was far from conclusive. The blood found in the car was not enough to charge Carpenter, and without any direct links to the crime scene, it left investigators in a state of limbo. Carpenter had been a close companion of Crane's, but the lack of concrete evidence meant they had little to hold on him at the time. As police continued to process the apartment, one element stood out, the silence. There was no sign of the killer's presence, no trace of struggle that might indicate a fleeing criminal. It was as though the crime had occurred with careful precision, a planning that left no marks, no traces of what had transpired. The calmness of the crime scene spoke to something more chilling, the possibility that the killer knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. This wasn't a crime of impulse or out-of-control rage, it was something far more calculated. The fact that the crime was carried out with such quiet deliberation left detectives haunted by an uncomfortable question: was the killer someone who had been in Crane's life, someone who had access to him, someone whom Crane had trusted? This was a question that would lead investigators to focus their attention on Carpenter, whose access to Crane's life was well documented. But at the time, the lack of definitive evidence meant that no one could be certain. As each detail was uncovered, the web of potential suspects seemed to grow tighter, yet the truth remained elusive. The murder scene provided more questions than answers, leaving investigators with no clear direction. Was the lack of evidence a result of an experienced criminal, one who had carefully covered their tracks? Or was it a sign that the murderer had been someone who knew Crane personally, someone who had been invited into his home, someone whom Crane trusted? These questions hung in the air as the investigation stumbled forward, each lead unraveling into more confusion. The crime scene itself, while shocking in its simplicity, became a reflection of the enigma that would define the case. The violence was horrific, yet the scene was unnervingly calm. This paradox, violence without chaos, kept investigators up at night, wondering what it meant about the nature of the crime. Was this the result of a crime of passion? Or was it the cold, calculated work of someone who had carefully planned the murder from the start? The days that followed the discovery of Bob Crane's body were filled with questions, uncertainty, and an increasing sense of dread. The investigation, though well-intentioned, seemed to be mired in complications. The critical evidence, including the blood found in Carpenter's car, was mishandled. Carpenter's alibi, though unconvincing, couldn't be completely disproven. The lack of physical evidence, no fingerprints, no weapon, no direct ties between Carpenter and the scene, left investigators grasping at straws. Despite the overwhelming public interest in the case, the investigation seemed to stall. The crime scene that had once promised so many answers only deepened the mystery. What happened that night? Who killed Bob Crane? And why? After all said and done, John Henry Carpenter as the prime suspect was eventually taken to court in order to clear all doubts. If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe and share to your loved ones to protect them from the same tragic happening to them in the future. The courtroom buzzed with a charged energy as John Henry Carpenter stood trial for the murder of Bob Crane in 1994. For over 15 years, the world had watched the investigation unfold, and now, the man who had once been the closest to the slain TV star was under intense scrutiny. Carpenter had been publicly identified as the primary suspect, and the evidence, while circumstantial, seemed to point in his direction. Bloodstains in his rental car, the strange nature of his friendship with Crane, and the increasingly toxic dynamics between the two men all suggested a complicated and troubling relationship. Yet, as the trial unfolded, a new question emerged: could Carpenter be convicted based solely on circumstantial evidence, or had the case unraveled beyond repair? The prosecution began with what seemed like a compelling case. They presented the blood evidence found in Carpenter's rental car as the central piece of the puzzle. The blood type, which matched Crane's, could not be easily dismissed. At the surface level, it was damning. Yet, the defense team immediately mounted a relentless attack on this evidence, pointing to significant mishandling during the investigation. The defense was keen to show the jury that while the blood in the car was suspicious, its handling, its storage, processing, and the chain of custody, was far from flawless. These mistakes, they argued, had tainted the credibility of the entire case. The first day of the trial was filled with fervor and expectation. The courtroom, packed with onlookers, legal teams, and reporters, buzzed with speculation. For years, the public had wondered about Carpenter's role in Crane's death. Now, they were about to get answers, or so they hoped. As the opening statements were made, the audience watched with bated breath. Carpenter, stone-faced and silent, sat in the defendant's chair, his gaze occasionally meeting the eyes of the jury. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of stoic composure. In contrast, Crane's family, sitting in the front row, exchanged looks of quiet anxiety. The weight of the trial was heavy on everyone, but none more so than those who had loved Crane. The prosecution's case, while based on the blood evidence, was never as strong as it first appeared. Carpenter's defense attorney was quick to seize on this vulnerability. The defense team's strategy was clear: to sow doubt about the evidence and turn the trial into a battle of credibility. They began by questioning the accuracy of the forensic results, suggesting that the blood in Carpenter's rental car might have been planted or simply misidentified. The defense painted the police's investigation as rushed and sloppy, highlighting crucial errors in evidence collection and preservation. They argued that without irrefutable proof that the bloodstains were directly linked to the murder, the case against Carpenter was flimsy at best. The defense also leaned heavily on the idea that Carpenter had no motive to kill Crane. They painted Carpenter as a man who was simply caught up in a messy friendship. The bond between the two men was complicated, no doubt, but it was not one that had escalated to murder. Carpenter's emotional attachment to Crane, though odd, was presented as the result of years of close friendship, not as the precursor to violence. They argued that Carpenter had no reason to kill Crane and that any suggestion otherwise was purely speculative. This narrative, while offering a glimpse into the complexities of their relationship, aimed to humanize Carpenter, making him seem like a man who had been emotionally hurt, but not one capable of murder. Despite the mounting evidence and the defense's continuous undermining of the prosecution's case, Carpenter's demeanor in the courtroom continued to fuel suspicion. His silence, his refusal to show any outward emotion, seemed calculated, as though he was playing a part. However, Carpenter's defense team encouraged him to take the stand, believing it would humanize him and demonstrate his innocence to the jury. What followed was an understated but carefully constructed testimony. Carpenter described his relationship with Crane as one of friendship, filled with mutual interests but without any animosity or ill will. He insisted that he had been nowhere near Crane's apartment on the night of the murder and that the blood in his rental car was not evidence of guilt, but a strange coincidence that could not be fully explained. As Carpenter spoke, his words were measured and controlled, but the tension in the room was palpable. The jury seemed undecided. While Carpenter's alibi was seemingly strong, the prosecution's lingering suspicions about the nature of his relationship with Crane remained unresolved. Carpenter's calm and unwavering testimony did little to dispel the shadow of doubt hanging over him. Some jurors seemed convinced by his story, while others could not shake the nagging feeling that something was missing, something that didn't quite add up. As the trial progressed, the prosecution's case slowly disintegrated. Despite the blood evidence and Carpenter's questionable emotional attachment to Crane, there was no direct link between him and the crime scene. No fingerprints. No murder weapon. No clear motive. What had once appeared to be a case with a strong lead had turned into a web of confusion and contradictions. After days of deliberations, the jury returned with a verdict: John Henry Carpenter was acquitted of all charges. The public's reaction to the verdict was immediate and overwhelmingly divided. For some, the acquittal was a disappointing and frustrating conclusion to a case that seemed to have so many answers, yet ended in uncertainty. For others, it was a reminder of the complexities of the justice system and the challenges of securing a conviction based on circumstantial evidence. Carpenter left the courthouse a free man, but the cloud of suspicion would never fully lift. The aftermath of the trial was one of confusion and disbelief. The questions surrounding Bob Crane's death, who killed him and why, remained unanswered. While Carpenter was acquitted, the theory that he was responsible for Crane's murder was never definitively disproven. The acquittal left many wondering how the prosecution had failed to make its case and whether justice had truly been served. Despite the verdict, the lingering doubts about Carpenter's involvement in Crane's death would continue to haunt the case for years to come. The media coverage surrounding Carpenter's trial was extensive. The public had been captivated by the details of the case, and every twist in the trial was eagerly reported. The courtroom drama, combined with the sensational nature of the crime, made for compelling viewing, and the press played a pivotal role in shaping public opinion. The portrayal of Carpenter as a man with a troubled past, combined with the strange nature of his relationship with Crane, made for an intriguing, if not sensational, narrative. Many saw the trial as a moment of reckoning, a chance to finally reveal the truth behind Crane's murder. But the acquittal left the public feeling dissatisfied, with the mystery still unsolved. In the years that followed, the media continued to revisit the trial, reigniting debates over whether Carpenter had gotten away with murder. Documentaries, books, and articles poured over the details of the case, suggesting that justice had not been served. Some argued that the trial was mishandled, that the defense team's strategy had been too effective in casting doubt on the evidence. Others believed that the prosecution had simply failed to prove its case, relying too heavily on circumstantial evidence that ultimately crumbled under scrutiny. John Carpenter's acquittal marked the end of the legal battle, but it did not bring closure. The mystery surrounding Bob Crane's death lived on, unresolved, for decades. The trial had drawn attention to the strange relationship between the two men, the bizarre obsession with filming their private lives, and the shadows that hung over their friendship. But despite the media sensationalism and the trial's dramatic moments, the true story of what happened on that fateful night in 1978 remained a mystery. The case of Bob Crane's murder would continue to haunt those who followed it, with many believing that the truth was still hidden somewhere, buried beneath layers of legal battles and unanswered questions. While Carpenter was acquitted, the suspicion surrounding him never truly faded. His acquittal did not silence the doubts, nor did it offer the clarity that the public and Crane's family so desperately sought. The trial, in the end, only deepened the mystery of Bob Crane's death, leaving behind an enigma that would linger for years to come. For nearly 4 decades, the case of Bob Crane's murder remained one of Hollywood's most enigmatic unsolved mysteries. The blood stains, the twisted nature of Crane's relationship with John Henry Carpenter, and the botched investigation had left investigators and the public alike with more questions than answers. But in 2016, technology offered a final glimmer of hope, a breakthrough that many believed could finally bring the elusive answers to light. It was a last chance to solve the case, and with modern DNA testing techniques, there was a brief but tantalizing promise that the truth would be revealed. In 2016, a last-ditch effort was made to re-examine the physical evidence. The blood, found in Carpenter's rental car, once thought to be the key piece of evidence, was sent for DNA retesting. The years had not been kind to the evidence, but new forensic methods offered a ray of hope. What could previously only be inferred from circumstantial details could now potentially be confirmed. Forensic experts worked diligently, processing the bloodstains, knowing that this might be the only chance to piece together the truth that had evaded investigators for nearly 40 years. Yet, as the results filtered in, a crushing disappointment followed. The blood found in Carpenter's car didn't match his. It didn't match Bob Crane's, either. Instead, the DNA pointed to an unknown male. The room fell silent as the forensic scientists reviewed the results again, hoping for a different outcome. But the results remained unchanged. The answers they had hoped for were still out of reach. It wasn't the breakthrough everyone had expected. The presence of a third, unidentified person threw the case into new turmoil. What did this mean? Was the killer still out there, or was there more to the story than anyone had considered? The forensic community, once hopeful that this final analysis would break the case wide open, now found themselves at a crossroads. The most compelling lead, the blood in the car, had failed to connect Carpenter or Crane to the crime. Instead, it introduced a new, unsettling question: who was this unknown male? Was the DNA a product of someone else involved in the murder, or was it a misdirection? The case that had seemed solvable with the advent of DNA testing had instead taken a baffling turn. The retesting, while a technological success, had failed to provide the clarity that had been so desperately sought for decades. The discovery of the unknown male's DNA shifted the entire direction of the case. Investigators were left grappling with the question of whether this person was connected to Crane's murder in a way they had never imagined. Could this third party be the true killer, someone who had somehow managed to leave no trace of themselves at the crime scene? Or was their DNA merely incidental, planted during a careless encounter that could lead the investigation into an entirely different direction? As the years had passed, more than just forensic evidence had been lost. Key witnesses had either passed away or faded into the background of a case that seemed to slip further into obscurity. With each new failure to link Carpenter directly to the crime, public interest waned, and many assumed that the mystery would never be solved. But the revelation of a third, unknown DNA sample injected a new layer of complexity into an already convoluted case. This new discovery, while offering no solid leads, kept the mystery alive. The unknown male's identity became a haunting symbol of how much of the case remained a puzzle. Was this person a part of a larger conspiracy? Or perhaps an accidental witness? The lack of conclusive answers meant that even after the retesting, the case was more of a riddle than ever. Forensic science had taken the investigation to its limits, only to find that the key to solving the case had slipped through their grasp. This moment, which had promised resolution, had instead given rise to even more unanswered questions. The 2016 DNA retesting, though a groundbreaking attempt at solving the case, could not bridge the gap between the past and the present. It failed to offer the resolution that so many had hoped for. The case of Bob Crane's murder, once filled with promising leads, had now descended into the depths of unsolved cold cases. The investigation had started with hope. There were plenty of signs that a breakthrough was just around the corner, but those hopes had been dashed. So much time had passed, and with it, so many key opportunities to resolve the case had been lost. Why had the case remained unsolved for so long? What had prevented law enforcement from uncovering the truth earlier? The answers to these questions seemed to lie in the mistakes made in the early stages of the investigation. From the mishandling of crucial evidence to the failure to properly interview witnesses, the investigation had been fraught with errors. The blood evidence, which seemed like the pivotal piece of the puzzle, had been mishandled, misfiled, or outright ignored. These early mistakes had set the stage for a long, drawn-out process of trying to piece together a case that had already started to slip out of reach. As the years went on, the case grew colder. Investigators who once devoted themselves to finding answers had long since moved on to other cases. The forensic evidence, once the final hope for closure, had been exhausted. The key players, John Carpenter, the prime suspect, and Bob Crane, the victim, were no longer available to offer any new insights. Carpenter's death in 1998 meant that no one would ever truly know what he had been thinking in the final days of the investigation. For the family of Bob Crane, their hopes for justice faded as the years wore on, and the questions surrounding his death remained unanswered. One of the most significant obstacles to solving the case was the passage of time. Key players in the investigation had died, and the memories of crucial witnesses had faded. Those closest to Bob Crane, including his friends and family, had their own recollections of his final days, but they were no longer able to contribute to the investigation. Investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case in its early days had either retired or left the department. With the key figures gone, the case lost much of its energy, and the hope for a breakthrough dwindled. Witnesses who might have held important details were either unwilling or unable to revisit the case, their memories clouded by years of distance. As time passed, it became increasingly unlikely that any new revelations would surface. The case of Bob Crane's death had become more of a cold legend, a tragic story that, despite its public intrigue, remained locked in the past. The failure to solve the case had become part of its mythos. What had once been a potential breakthrough in Hollywood's history was now a lingering shadow, a mystery that seemed too distant to resolve. Despite the passage of time, the murder of Bob Crane refused to fade away. The case had been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and public speculation, and it continued to captivate those who found it compelling. It became one of Hollywood's most famous unsolved mysteries, and even though the years had eroded the likelihood of finding an answer, the public never fully let go of the story. The question of who killed Bob Crane lingered on, an unanswered riddle that taunted the criminal justice system. There were those who remained hopeful that one day, perhaps through new forensic technologies or a breakthrough witness, the case would be solved. Yet, with each passing year, the chances of resolution seemed to grow more remote. The mystery of Bob Crane's death had become one of those rare cases that lingered in the public consciousness, never quite fading, but never fully resolved. In this way, the case had taken on a life of its own, and its legacy became one of intrigue, frustration, and unanswered questions. As the years have passed, the story of Bob Crane's murder has grown into a symbol of Hollywood's dark side, of fame, obsession, and the blurred lines between public persona and private life. The case remains a study in how time, mistakes, and mismanagement can turn what might have been a straightforward investigation into an insurmountable enigma. The fact that it remains unsolved today, nearly half a century later, speaks to the limitations of forensic science, the complications of human memory, and the complexities of the justice system. The unresolved nature of the case leaves behind a haunting question: could Crane's murder have been solved, had the investigation been handled differently? Could justice have been served if the evidence had been preserved, or if Carpenter's alibi had been scrutinized more thoroughly? These questions remain unanswered, and as the years continue to pass, the likelihood of closure grows slimmer. But one thing is certain: the story of Bob Crane's murder, with its twists, its failures, and its unanswered mysteries, will continue to echo through the corridors of Hollywood for years to come. The final DNA retesting of 2016 was meant to provide the clarity that had eluded investigators for decades, but it left the case even more shrouded in uncertainty. The identification of an unknown male's DNA only added more layers to a mystery that had already become increasingly complex. The passage of time, coupled with errors made in the investigation, meant that the case was as unresolved as it had been in 1978. The cold case status of Bob Crane's murder is a testament to the challenges faced by law enforcement in solving cases that span decades. What was once an open investigation now sits as one of Hollywood's most enduring, unsolved crimes, a tragic, tantalizing story that refuses to let go. The murder of Bob Crane has haunted Hollywood for over 4 decades, leaving behind a trail of questions and a web of theories that no one has yet been able to untangle. Was it John Henry Carpenter, the friend whose obsession with Crane grew increasingly toxic? Or was there something more lurking behind the shadows of Crane's personal life, jealous lovers, Hollywood scandals, or a secret from the depths of his past? Theories abound, each adding a layer to the mystery but offering no definitive answers. What really happened on the night of June 29, 1978? Was the motive revenge, jealousy, or something darker still? With no clear resolution, the case remains as enigmatic as ever, with no shortage of ideas about who the killer might be. John Carpenter, the man who had once been closest to Crane, is the central figure in many of the theories. Carpenter's obsession with his friend has long been documented, and the nature of their relationship, intimate, secretive, and strange, makes him the prime suspect for many. Their shared passion for filming sexual encounters created a bond between them, but it was a bond marred by tension. Carpenter's feelings for Crane, though never fully articulated, appeared to go beyond friendship. His presence in Crane's personal life, his access to Crane's apartment, and his knowledge of the actor's intimate moments all made Carpenter a key figure in the investigation. But while Carpenter's possible involvement seems obvious at first glance, the case has never been so simple. Carpenter's defense, during the 1994 trial, effectively cast doubt on the blood evidence linking him to the murder. Despite the bloodstains found in his rental car, blood that matched Crane's type, the jury was not convinced. Carpenter's lawyers attacked the mishandling of the evidence, creating enough ambiguity to ensure his acquittal. In the years following the trial, Carpenter maintained his innocence, offering little more than a defiant silence. Despite this, many are still convinced that Carpenter was responsible for Crane's death. The blood evidence remains a powerful clue, and Carpenter's behavior and motivations seem to align with the possibility of a vengeful act. But the theory that Carpenter killed Crane is far from universally accepted. The idea that a friendship, however complex, could have led to murder is difficult for some to fathom. And as time goes on, with no concrete evidence to connect Carpenter to the crime, the theory begins to weaken. If Carpenter is not the killer, then who is? This question has given rise to several alternative theories. One of the most compelling is the possibility that Crane's death was the result of jealousy, perhaps at the hands of a lover who felt betrayed by Crane's actions. The actor's secret life, which he went to great lengths to keep hidden, was fraught with affairs, casual encounters, and private obsessions. Could one of the women involved in Crane's life, someone who felt slighted or scorned, have turned violent in a moment of emotional turmoil? Was Crane's death an act of passion, carried out by someone who felt wronged by him? Hollywood, with its seedy underbelly and long history of scandal, also offers fertile ground for speculation. Crane's fame had attracted attention, and the allure of a scandalous life could have made him a target for those looking to expose his secrets. In this theory, Crane's murder could have been a result of his entanglement in a larger web of Hollywood's unsavory elements, people who would stop at nothing to prevent their own secrets from being revealed. If Crane was involved in a dangerous game of power and manipulation behind closed doors, could one of his associates have decided that silencing him was the only way to protect their own interests? For some, the theory that the murder was related to Crane's complicated private life seems plausible. The fact that Crane's relationships were filled with secrecy and emotional turbulence provides fertile ground for this theory. Yet, the lack of any direct evidence to support the idea of a jealous lover or vengeful Hollywood figure complicates this line of thinking. Theories about an outside perpetrator remain just that, unproven speculations that, while intriguing, offer no clear answers. Perhaps the most perplexing twist in the case came in 2016, when DNA from the blood found in Carpenter's rental car was retested using more advanced technology. The results were startling. The blood did not match either Carpenter or Bob Crane. Instead, it pointed to an unknown male, a third person who had never been identified, and whose DNA had never been linked to the crime. This revelation turned the investigation on its head and cast even more doubt on the idea that Carpenter was the killer. Was this third person involved in the murder? Or was their DNA simply incidental? The identification of an unknown male added a new layer of complexity to an already complicated case. The idea of a third party being involved in Crane's murder opens up an entirely new set of questions. Who was this person, and how did they become connected to the crime? Could this DNA have been planted, or was it a sign of a larger conspiracy that we may never fully understand? The failure to match Carpenter or Crane to the DNA only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators, and the public, with even more questions. Was Carpenter simply a scapegoat, a man wrongly accused due to his proximity to Crane's complicated life? Or had this unknown third party orchestrated a murder that no one could have predicted? What makes Bob Crane's murder even more heartbreaking is the realization that the case remains unsolved after so many years. Time has eroded the potential for a clean resolution. The players in the case, including Carpenter, have passed away, and the witnesses who might have provided crucial insights have either died or become unwilling to revisit the past. The forensic evidence that once seemed so promising has been compromised by time and mishandling. What was once a case with clear leads has slowly unraveled, becoming one of Hollywood's most notorious unsolved mysteries. The flaws in the investigation were evident from the start. From the mishandling of evidence to the failure to properly investigate all the potential leads, the case suffered from a series of missed opportunities. When the key evidence, the blood in Carpenter's car, was collected, the chain of custody was compromised. The forensic tests on the evidence were delayed, and by the time the DNA retesting occurred in 2016, the chance of finding a definitive answer was already slim. The mistakes made in the investigation have had lasting consequences, and the failure to properly handle the evidence means that the truth is forever out of reach. As the years pass, the chances of solving the case continue to dwindle. The mystery surrounding Bob Crane's death is no longer just about a crime, it is about what remains unsaid, what remains hidden. It is about the failed opportunities for justice and the frustration of a case that cannot be solved. It is a haunting reminder of the fragility of truth, and the ease with which a case can slip away into the past, leaving only questions and shadows behind. Bob Crane's legacy is one of contradictions. To the public, he was a lovable, heroic figure on Hogan's Heroes, a symbol of post-war American optimism. His charming smile, his easy laughter, his warmth, they made him a household name. Yet beneath this public persona, Crane was a man with private struggles, driven by desires that he kept hidden from the world. His relationships, his secret life, his obsession with filming his most intimate moments, all these facets of his existence painted a picture of a man torn between his public and private selves. Crane's death, shrouded in mystery, leaves us with one final question: will we ever truly know the truth? The theories surrounding his murder, from Carpenter's potential involvement to the discovery of an unknown male's DNA, only add to the confusion. Every theory presents a different version of events, but none of them can offer the final answer. Was Carpenter the killer, or was he simply an unwitting pawn in a larger conspiracy? Was the murder driven by jealousy, obsession, or something darker still? The theories, while compelling, only serve to deepen the mystery. The case of Bob Crane's murder is a reminder of the complexities of human nature, of the secrets we hide, the lives we lead in private, and the shadows that can linger long after death. Crane's legacy, shaped by both his public persona and the darkness of his personal life, continues to captivate those who seek answers. His death may remain unsolved, but his story, and the questions it raises about identity, fame, and obsession, will endure. As we look back on the life and death of Bob Crane, one thing remains clear: some mysteries are simply not meant to be solved. The truth about Crane's murder may never be fully known, and perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all. The questions linger, unanswered, as Crane's legacy lives on, not in the laughter he gave to millions, but in the unsolved mystery of his untimely death.